This is DW News live from Berlin. Gunmen attack a church in southwestern Pakistan, killing at least 9 and wounding dozens. 2 attackers target a Methodist church in Quetta where hundreds of worshippers had gathered. The so-called Islamic State has claimed responsibility. Also coming up, corruption and scandal have plagued the ANC's current leader, South African President Jacob Zuma. Now the contest to select his successor threatens to split the party. And Australian police arrest a man accused of acting as an agent on behalf of North Korea. They say he tried to broker the sale of missile components and coal to third parties in Indonesia and Vietnam. I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. We begin in Pakistan, where a suicide attack on a church service has left at least 9 people dead and dozens wounded. The 2 gunmen targeted a Methodist church in Quetta in the west of the country. Hundreds of worshippers were gathered in the church at the time of the attack. Police and army troops surrounded the church and exchanged fire with the heavily armed militants before one of the attackers blew himself up. Well, joining us now on the line from Islamabad is journalist Asad Hashim. Asad, the so-called Islamic States claim responsibility for this attack. How credible is that?
Well, absolutely. So that's just come in through their Amaq news agency, where they have released a short statement claiming that they had sent 2 attackers to this church. Now, the credibility of these claims that have come in several times before is almost impossible to verify. Islamic State has done this often, where when its attack takes place and when it hasn't been claimed in the hours that follow it, they will release a statement that does link them in some way. Usually, the only way to corroborate whether they were actually involved is if a second statement comes in later in the day, which often will have pictures of the attackers or will have some sort of video statement that kind of corroborates an actual physical link to the operational planning of this attack. We do know that Islamic State has carried out attacks, or the so-called Islamic State has carried out attacks in Balochistan before through a local affiliate known as the Lashkar-e-Jhangvi Al-Alami, but we're so far hearing nothing from that group saying that they were involved in this. So we will have to wait and see whether or not this is really a credible claim.
All right, well, we're still learning more about the attack at this stage. What's the latest you can tell us about the situation on the ground?
Well, at the moment now, it seems that the area has been completely cleared. The police and army have finished their search and cordon operations following the attack, which occurred somewhere around midday services today on Sunday. It seemed 2 attackers were attempting to gain entry into the compound. They were first apprehended by the guard who was at the gate. That guard was killed by one of them, and then the other attackers began to fire as they came into the main hall, or tried to access the main hall. Police were then alerted and opened fire upon them. One suicide attacker then blew up his vest. Another was unable to blow up his vest, but then was continuing to fire for a short while later. He was then killed by police as well. Most of the injuries and the deaths that we've seen have come from, we're hearing, from the shattered glass and windows that were blown up from the force of the explosion that was outside the church itself and blew that debris into the church and the worshippers. So as of now, it seems that the chief of police has said that the search operations are over and they have secured the area.
Assad, are attacks on the Christian minority common in this region?
Yes, absolutely. We've seen, unfortunately, a number of attacks targeting all of Pakistan's minorities, including Christians, in the last few years. Christians have always been a soft target in this country, as they number more than in the millions, really, in Pakistan. They're about 1.6% of the population. And so there are hundreds of churches across the country, and police say that it's, while they do attempt to heighten security at times, particularly at times like these in the run-up to Christmas, it's almost impossible to secure all of them. One of the biggest attacks that we saw was last year, of course, near Easter. There was a bombing at a park that was claimed by the Pakistani Taliban. That killed more than 75 people and was one of the deadliest attacks that year. That was targeting a festival that was being organized for mainly for Christians to celebrate Easter, but there were Muslims and all other Pakistanis at that park as well. This was in the eastern city of Lahore. We've seen other attacks as well in the last few years.
Journalist Asad Hashim in Islamabad. Thank you. In South Africa, the party that ended apartheid is confronting its future. At the conference of the African National Congress, current leader and South African President Jacob Zuma is hoping to bring his party together. Zuma himself faces ongoing corruption allegations. In office since 2009, this is likely to be his last term. Zuma's deputy and his ex-wife are the top contenders looking to succeed him. Well, for more on this, I'm joined in the studio by DW's Christine Mundwa. Christine, will we find out today who the next party leader will be?
Well, we wait with bated breath, and unfortunately not. We've just seen a notice come from the party's Deputy Secretary General to say because of the delays that we've seen pretty much since the start of this conference, they only finalised the credentials late this morning. Essentially, that's the procedure that must take place before voting can actually commence. There were issues about certain delegates who were given accreditation, who people had issue with, and then there were some delegates who claim they could not be accredited for the conference. So there was a lot of issues around that. So that, we understand, has been finalised, but there are more delays. So we're going to have to wait until probably tomorrow morning at the latest to get the result.
Issues, delays, the divisions are already stark within the ANC. Does this potentially spell the beginning of the end for the party?
Helena, if you had made that statement 2 years ago, we would have talked about it being potentially sensationalist. But we are in a new territory with the ANC. Jacob Zuma's leadership of this party has brought it to a place that we've not seen it before. Going into this, there were 8 presidential candidates, people vying for this top job. And the Secretary General of the party said that was indicative of just how deeply rooted the divisions within this party were. At an all-time low with its partners, the ANC is at right now. One of its partners, the South African Communist Party, refuses to have President Zuma address its congresses. So this is where we are at this party, deeply divided, a lot of factions, and people saying that the threat of a split is real now more than it's ever been.
The threat of a split, and it's certainly a tight race that we're seeing. Who are the top candidates?
It is, Helena, the 2 top candidates. So you've got Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, an astute politician. She's a woman. She's held several big portfolios in South Africa's cabinet, including Interior Minister. Most recently, she was the chairperson of the African Union. The perfect politician. She's a woman, and that's what people in politics are calling for right now in South Africa. The challenge she has is she's affiliated with Jacob Zuma. He endorsed her. And the problem with her is that people feel that if she takes over as ANC president and potentially the president of South Africa in 2019, she will shield Zuma from the prosecution that people say he needs to see, that he needs to face his day in court. We've had various courts in South Africa saying he's breached the constitution. People want him to be held to account. People also fear that his style of politics will simply play out through her. Then you've got his deputy, Cyril Ramaphosa, who, by the way, was meant to succeed Nelson Mandela way back when, but has now come back. He's been in business. He's come back into politics. He said he is ready to assume the role of leading the country. He challenges this. He's one of the richest men in the country. A lot of black South Africans look at him and think, you're too closely affiliated with white monopoly capital. Race is still a massive thing in South African society. And so Cyril's critics are very quick to remind the public that Cyril Ramaphosa is so rich and he will only do the bidding of the Western world, for example, or white people who, by and large, still hold South Africa's wealth.
Now, we saw that final speech from Jacob Zuma in the capacity as leader of the ANC. He admitted failings of the party. How was it received?
Well, here's the thing. So he talked about the failings of the party. He talked about the failings of government at large, even. But he didn't take any of the blame. He allocated the blame to everybody and anybody else but himself. And people felt that that was a moment that a leader could have taken to say, this is where I got it wrong, this is where it could be improved. But he simply allocated the blame to the alliance partners, to certain members who had even taken the party to court. He scolded people for allowing external forces and influences within the party. And people are saying, as the leader of the party, you presided over a party that is disintegrated to the point that we see the divisions that we see today. The corruption level. He chose to rather dwell on private sector corruption and merely glancing over public sector corruption, which is crippling that country's economy and keeping investment away.
DW's Christine Mundwa. Thanks, as ever.
Thanks, Elena.
Now to some of the other stories making news around the world. Thousands of Ukrainians gathered in central Kiev for an anti-corruption rally led by opposition figure Mikhail Saakashvili. The former president of Georgia has been calling for the removal of oligarchs from the government and the impeachment of Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. Polls have opened in Chile's runoff presidential election. The vote will determine if the country turns right with conservative billionaire and former president Sebastián Piñera or stays on its centre-left course. Candidate Alejandro Guillier is supported by the current president, Michelle Bachelet. In the Philippines, tropical storm Kai-Tak has triggered landslides and floods that have killed more than 30 people and left several others missing. The slow-moving storm passed over the eastern Philippines on Saturday. Officials report heavy damage to power lines, roads and bridges. Police in Australia have arrested a man for allegedly acting as a, quote, economic agent for North Korea. He's accused of attempting to broker sales of missile technology and coal to third parties in Indonesia and Vietnam. The naturalised Australian citizen of Korean descent is the first person to be charged under the country's Weapons of Mass Destruction Act. In the United States, authorities have ordered new evacuations in parts of California as a massive wildfire continues to spread. Fierce winds have pushed the inferno closer to Santa Barbara and Montecito, with thousands of homes threatened by that blaze. Well, thousands of people have turned out at the Vatican to wish Pope Francis a happy birthday. The pontiff is turning 81 today. Crowds shouted their good wishes to Francis as he delivered his weekly address. Earlier in the day, the Pope joined children from a Vatican medical clinic where he was presented with not one, but two birthday cakes, the first somewhat more traditional than the second. You're watching DW News from Berlin. Don't forget, you can always get the latest news and information around the clock on our website, dw.com. Thanks for watching, and do join us again at the top of the hour if you can. Bye for now.